September call-ups. They haven't always been a thing, but they have been a thing for a very long time. Today, we're gonna talk about September call-ups, how they have changed over time. That is roster expansion that happens every September for every major league team. Right now, you get 2 players expanding your roster out from 26 to 28, but it hasn't always been that way. And I don't know if it's actually a good thing or a bad thing, but I think that there's not a lot of people that know a lot about how this works. Real quick overview of the timeline, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the type of impact that these players have moving forward, because I think there is quite a big impact of rookies or guys joining the team late in the season, and there's a good correlation between that and that team going deep into the playoffs. So way back in 1910, where it all began, roster sizes were established at 25. So the normal roster was a 25-man roster for a very long time. They put this in play because teams were carrying just however many players and just rotating them into the games and hoarding players. This was before the PA, this is before free agency and arbitration and a lot of the rules that were built to give players a little bit more rights and the ability to take more control of their own careers, which you know, if you've been here at all, that I'm a big fan of that. Then, 11 years later in 1921, they established the 40-man reserve roster, or what we now know is called the 40-man, which still lives to today. The 40-man roster is all of the players that can be called up to the big leagues without needing to make any adjustments to their contract. If a guy is on a minor league contract, you cannot call him to the major leagues unless he's put on that 40-man roster. Once you're in the minor leagues and you were after your 5th minor league season, you either are protected on the 40-man, they call it protection, so that team, they retain the rights to you. They don't have to put you in the big leagues or anything, but your pay goes up quite a bit. Like I think mine went from like $10,000 a year to like $42,000 a year. So I was like, wow, I'm almost making real minimum wage. So that is kind of one of the protections put in place. If you're not protected, you go into something called the Rule 5 draft, which you may have heard Rule 5 guys getting called up. Ryan Presley was one. Ryan Noda was one for us in 2023 with Oakland. Once you're put on that 40-man roster, or if you're not put on it, you're picked up in the Rule 5 draft, you have to be in the major leagues for the entire season with that team unless you go back to the team you were previously on and your minor league contract continues. So it's in your best interest to stay in the big leagues, get your full year of service time, but you have to get a full year of service time for that to count. That is kind of how the 40-man functions now and during the regular season. But historically, when these rosters expand in September, because they introduced that, like I said, in 1921, where the rosters can expand in September to basically give the guys who played all year a blow if you need it, or to try out guys for the team next year, right? It's like a spring training at the end of the year, almost like a tryout, especially for the teams that aren't really in the race. So what you saw and what I saw early in my career from 2014 till this changed eventually in 2020 is the teams that were out of it had a ton of players. The teams that weren't as out of it had less. They weren't just cycling in a bunch of young guys because they were still trying to make the playoffs or they were getting ready to go into playoffs. And the rosters revert back to the regular rosters size, which is now 26. It was 25 before in playoffs anyways. So you're going to have to kind of backpedal either way. What could happen though, especially for teams out of it, is that your bullpen or dugout could end up looking like this. Now you see about 1,000 dudes all in the Boston home side bullpen dugout, which is actually bigger than the away side. Actually, I believe this is the dugout. I don't think this is the bullpen. Either way, they look the same. So it could be either one. But as you can see, a lot of guys need a knee. Guys jammed in there. It's not big to start from. So these guys, like, I can't imagine what their clubhouse is like. You run out of lockers. Some benefits of that can be the guys who've been there all for the first 140-ish games can get some rest. And you can cycle in, you can do a line change halfway through the game, you can do all this kind of stuff. But one downside of that is, especially if you get into the playoffs, is if you're constantly giving your guys blows, then sometimes it starts to feel like the end of school year. And when that happens, you kind of take your foot off the gas, and then it's hard to get yourself back up for the playoffs. This all changed in 2020, as many rules did. Now, we had a taxi squad situation. There was no minor league teams playing. So they needed to have some new type of framework to get players in and out in the COVID situation. But one of the big goals was keep people away from each other. So adding a ton of guys into the locker room didn't make any sense. It was kind of against the whole thing we were trying to do at that point anyway. So that was mostly the benefit. But we decided to keep those rules after 2020 and to this day, because when you have a ton of pitchers and you have a ton of position players, the games tank longer because talent's not as good and there's just guys moving. You got to move people all over the place. The less moving pieces, the quicker games go. And as you know very well, that has been a main goal for the commissioner's office and the rule changes. Something that I don't disagree with. I agree Faster games are better, and limiting the roster sizes in September have become a big part of that. Now the roster sizes are 26 with a maximum of 13 pitchers. I don't know why there is a cap on pitchers. It's super annoying, but when in doubt, make the pitchers have the limit. And then when there's 28 going into September, you get 2 additional guys, 1 position player, 1 pitcher. Now, you pray that pitcher is a bullpen guy, but teams have been going to 6-man rotations and all kinds of stuff. So usually your bullpen's like, oh, we've had 8 all year. Now we have 8 still. Great. We're still going to cover the innings that we have to cover, which stinks. And I preferred it when I could be like, hey, we're up by 4. You can pitch. Because it was nice to at least know that you could really pigeonhole yourself, really focus on that role that you usually have, that's my spot. And I'm not going to have to cover any extra things outside of that and get a blow going into hopefully a playoff. There are benefits to this for the teams that are competing. It gives you an opportunity to bring a guy up that you maybe haven't had space for because everyone stayed healthy, right? You can get a real reinforcement, or someone comes off the IL at the end of the year and they can then be eligible to pitch in the playoffs and get a month of big league facing hitters or facing pitching so that they can be ready to go. Even if they haven't played much during the season, that still gives them another month to kind of finagle that. And it's just a free spot you can get off the IL without having to move somebody out of the way. That's usually a problem. It alleviates a little bit of the roster crunch, especially if you're trying to manipulate your rosters and get ready for the playoffs. Also, the rules for doubleheaders still apply. So if you have a 28-man roster, you get a 29th guy for the doubleheader, and during the regular season, it's 26, 27. And we already mentioned you have to be on the 40-man to be called up. So that's how that rule works. And in order to be eligible for the playoffs, you have to be either on the 60-day IL or on the 40-man roster by noon on September 1st. That is a current rule. So on September 1st, if there was anyone that they wanted to select their contracts guys that weren't on the 40-man and put them on the 40-man, they had to do it by that time or they could not play in the playoffs. I actually don't know off the top of my head if anyone did that this year, but that is the rule. So if someone's been up there all September and they can't play in the playoffs, that rule is probably what happened. And then there's obviously the two-way designation is very important now with the smaller roster sizes, the Ohtani rule, as it has been aptly named. You have to designate one or the other, or you have to say they're a two-way player, and they basically take up one roster spot, which is really cool and really beneficial if you can get a two-way player. But currently, we only have one. So kind of only applies to him. That's kind of why it's named after him. Games are faster. That's why we changed it. But what I really want to talk about is how important rookies are to the ultimate success in the playoffs. Because I think this rears its head every single year. And this isn't just about September call-ups, but it is related. We've had case after case after case of guys getting called up in September and then becoming meaningful pieces or even star players into the playoffs. For example, Corey Seager in September 2015, he hit .337 in 27 games and earned himself an immediate October role with the Dodgers. We have Evan Carter in 2023, very recent. He hit .306 in 23 games in the big leagues. I believe he made his debut against the A's. I was there. Then he hit .300 across 17 postseason games, and they won the World Series. And without Evan Carter, arguably, it might not have happened. Right? And he was a rookie. Those are examples of guys being called up in September and that working out. But what if they're called up at another point, maybe not in September, but a little bit earlier? Rookies coming up late in the season is and being productive is very important for success for that team. So let's look at a couple happening right now. We have the New York Mets, we have the Boston Red Sox. A bunch of teams are getting their guys in August or maybe even late July, where they're coming up, they're fresh, they haven't thrown as many innings or been on their feet as much or played in as many games as the major league team. When you're called up and you haven't played as much as everybody else and you have this energy and this adrenaline, it sometimes takes the pressure off of those core guys, the Juan Sotos, the Francisco Lindors of the world, who play every single day, to get a little production out of your young guys that then help you get maybe a little bit of a mental blow or little of a pressure blow off of you so that you can get ready to go take over in the playoffs. I have a bunch of examples of this happening recently in all positions, right? And like for the Mets, they need Tong and they need McLean. So far, so good. Those two guys have really stepped up for that Mets team, and that doesn't mean that they need to go into the playoffs now. I think McLean, we're hoping for this to happen, but it's not like they need to go in and be the aces in the playoffs. But what they do need to do is go be there and be fresh arms and throw really well in September to give them momentum going to the playoffs, very minimum. And that is what they're getting. These two guys are helping them turn this thing around because, as we talked about last week, starting pitching has been the problem. In Boston, it's Tolley. Another energy guy got called up recently, and they have starting pitching woes. They just released Walker Buehler. He has really struggled, right? They needed somebody to come in and be exciting and be like a vision of the future in order to kind of take the microscope off of the guys who've been there all year year and may or may not be dialed in at the moment. Here's some guys who, in their rookie years, played huge roles in their team's success. And we're gonna go back in time a little bit here, so hope we got some old heads in here. This is Marty Bystrom, 1980, Philadelphia Phillies, rookie. He was a September call-up, and he went 5-0 with a 1.5 ERA to help to win a tight division race. And then he started Game 5 of the World Series in Philly's first title run. So they won the World Series. This guy won every one of his first 5 starts and with a 1.5 ERA, arguably being the catalyst to really propel them into the playoffs, feeling strong, feeling high momentum, and ended up pitching well in the playoffs, and they won it all. And without him, and I bet you there's a lot of Philly fans in here who would agree with this, without him, that probably wouldn't happen. More recently, you may have heard of this guy, Derek Jeter, 1996. He was the Rookie of the Year, and then he hit 361 across 15 postseason games. And then the ALCS of the year, he hit the famous Meyer home run. Maybe more recently, maybe you need someone you guys know from your generation. David Price, 2008. They made that Cinderella run all the way to the World Series, where David Price, he debuted in mid-September, so he only got there the last 2 weeks, which was normal. He recorded the final 4 outs for the save in ALCS Game 7, and they clinched their first pennant, and he was a big part of that. On that same team, Evan Longoria homered in his first 2 postseason at-bats that year and hit 6 homers in the playoffs. He was a rookie. So these 2 rookies really carried them, and as you can remember, name anyone else on those teams besides those 2. Took a second, probably. We had Mad Bum, Madison Bumgarner in 2010. As a rookie, he threw 8 shutout innings in World Series Game 4 against Texas. And that, as we all know, that was the first of 3 World Series championships in 3 years. Or 5 years, sorry. We got a couple of Cardinals. We got Michael Wacha, 2013. He was a rookie. NLCS MVP, 13 2/3 scoreless innings versus the Dodgers. Cards won the pennant. And then we have Adam Wainwright. Threw him in the bullpen. 2006, his rookie year. He finished up the World Series taking down the New York Mets. As a lot of you remember, falling to the ground, throwing his hands up. All of these guys, rookies. And many of them were called up halfway through the year. Yes, this is an example of these guys being stars, but they don't always have to be stars. I remember specifically 2019. We were kind of starting to fade. We won 101 games on the year. This is my Minnesota Twins team. Then we started to fade a little bit. We got a spark of hope, a spark of energy from 2 guys, Louis Arias, you may have heard of him, and the Uber driver, Randy Dobnak, who threw great in the last part of August all the way into September and got a playoff start for us. Of course, we got swept in the division series, but they were a huge part of getting us that division title as well, because we had the Cleveland Guardians hot on our heels, another very good team at that time. Rookies with legs under them, rookies that didn't play as many games in the minor leagues, rookies that didn't have this perpetual kind of everyday grind. In the big leagues, it takes more out of you than it takes in the minors. Mentally, physically, spiritually, you can get really worn down, especially if it's just been a battle all year just to maintain your spot or push for a title or for a division lead. And when that happens, you need fresh blood. And when that fresh blood, it only needs to be a couple guys, come up, they have that energy and they have a little bit of success, it can be a spark that drives the other 20 plus guys that were already there and drag them along behind them. So pay attention as we move forward here and we get into this year's playoff race. What teams have what rookies stepping up and really taking it to the next level, because those teams may just have the best position going into the playoffs.